everyone, welcome to today's video. The end of year content is here and I'm starting off with the most surprising books I read in 2023. I'm going to preface this by apologising for the lighting in this video. I filmed this yesterday and the lighting was so bad, in the end I decided that I would refilm, but today the lighting's not much better, so I'm just going to have to go with it and hope for the best. And I also wanted to say that I didn't expect to hate any of these books. I don't pick books up thinking I'm not going to like them, but they're books that I perhaps didn't really have many expectations of and they pleasantly surprised me. I'm also not including any of my favourite books of the year here because I want to keep that a little bit of a surprise, but I guess you could say some of them were surprising as well. But I'm going to kick off with the book that I read most recently, which is We're All Completely Beside Ourselves by Karen Joy Fowler. This is one that I read for my family book club and I've actually already lent my copy to my friend, so that's why I don't have it. I actually don't own many of these. I definitely need to. I do own that book, but I have lent it out. So yeah, read this for the family book club and my mum read this a while ago and told me about it, and to be honest it just didn't really seem like something that I would love, so I've never really been that drawn to picking it up. But then obviously she picked this book, I then had to pick it up and I couldn't believe how much I loved this. I thought it was so good. There is a twist in here that I already knew beforehand, which again was another reason why I thought I wouldn't enjoy this as much. And I would say I think you'll have a far better reading experience if you don't know the twist going in. But that being said, I still loved it anyway. It was quite interesting to read it knowing what the twist was and seeing if I could pick up on things. And I definitely wouldn't have guessed it had I not already known. But as I said, I feel like go into this not knowing too much because I think it would make the reading experience even better. But what I will say, to keep it very brief, is that we are following our main character, who is, I think she's in her early to mid 20s, I'm not quite sure, but she's this young woman and we know that her brother and her sister have gone and we don't know why. And the whole book we're kind of understanding how that happened, what happened, and how they as a family have kind of got to where they are, and it is heartbreaking. I sobbed, absolutely sobbed reading this book. I found it so emotional, but I can't really say why because it is a major spoiler. But if you have read this, I feel like you would know, like it is a very emotional read. But yeah, as I said, didn't really go into this thinking that I was going to enjoy it because it just didn't seem like it would be a book that I would want to read. So I'm so pleased that my mum kind of forced me to pick it up because I loved it so much and yeah, completely surprised me. The next one's a bit of a surprise because not that I thought this was going to be bad at all, but it's a romance, and romance has just been a bit mid for me this year, to be honest. So especially towards the start of the year I wasn't really enjoying any of the romances that I was picking up and I just felt like I was falling out of love with the genre. But I then picked up Honey and Spice by Bolu Babalola and I was quickly reminded that I have not in fact fallen out of love with romance. I just needed to be reading the right ones, and this was without a doubt a perfect romance in my opinion. I loved it so much. We're following Kiki and Malachi and they're at university, and Kiki she kind of has this like radio show, like a university radio show, and all these people start messaging in talking about this same guy who's been playing them all, and it turns out that this is Malachi. And eventually both Kiki and Malachi kind of, like, more goes on, but they kind of come to this agreement that if they fake date it will benefit the both of them for various different reasons. So we have a fake dating situation in here. I said when I read this book that I have never read a book where the two love interests have so much chemistry. Like, I adored this so much, and there were such great characters and there were such great love interests for one another. I really loved it, and I think if you have been wanting to pick this one up or have been wanting to find a good romance, then this one, you will not go wrong. It is fantastic and I loved it so much. Next up we have got The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. Again, this is one that I didn't really have many expectations going in. I had watched the film, a long time ago when I was really young, and I couldn't really remember much of it. So in my mind, I was like, well, if the film's not too memorable for me, then the book can't be that great. I was wrong. This book was so good. It's the perfect YA book in my opinion. Like it's written for young adults by a young adult at the time. Essie Hinton was a teenager when she wrote this, which I find absolutely incredible. Like, wow. It's definitely of its time. I think this was published in the 60s, I want to say, but I'm not 100% sure on that. And we're following these two rival gangs. Our main character is Ponyboy, and we are following him and his friend as they have to essentially go on the run because something really quite major happens. This event happens and they decide that they need to leave, and we're following them and all the goings on, and it's just so heartbreaking, and I adored it. I loved it so much, and it's made me want to watch the film again because I feel like it's going to be so much better than what I remember. But yeah, this is incredible and I loved it. Like I said, definitely of its time, but I think if you are looking for a true YA book, not a YA book that's written with adults in mind, definitely pick this one up. Next up is The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson, and this one is one that made me realise that maybe I could love fantasy. Now this isn't like a high fantasy by any means. It's kind of been described as a witchy Handmaid's Tale, and I would definitely say that that is true. I just loved this so much. So intense, but so good. We are essentially following our main character, Emmanuelle, and she is living in this very oppressed society. Women are very much oppressed, and her family are kind of looked down on because Emmanuelle's mother, she fell in love with someone outside of her race, and so Emmanuelle is biracial. So that brought shame upon the family, but Emmanuelle's mother is no longer alive, so Emmanuelle is living with her grandparents. She never knew her mum, but she ends up coming across her mother's journal, and it turns out that her mother was quite close with these witches, and so Emmanuelle is kind of going into the woods and trying to find these witches for herself. And then alongside this, we're learning more about the society. So it's run by this prophet who has multiple wives who are all extremely underage, and Emmanuelle realises that he needs to be stopped and this needs to change, and her that has to do it. But she also ends up teaming up with the prophet's son. Obviously, he's the next in line and he doesn't like the way it is either. He wants to see changes. So they team up and there's a lovely romance between those two, which I adored. And it's very high stakes, very action packed, while still not feeling too much. Like if you're not a fantasy reader, I feel like this will be perfectly fine for you to pick up, like me, because I wouldn't consider myself a fantasy reader. It's very light on the fantasy, but still it's so good. I loved it so much, and as I said, it's made me realise that I probably could love fantasy novels. Another fantasy that I loved, I guess the fact that it's a fantasy and I enjoyed them so much is why they're surprising to me, because it's a genre that I've only really kind of read properly this year. And this one is The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. This is essentially, like, there's definitely more to it than this, but the way I was sold it was, it's like the Hunger Games but make it vampires. So we're following our main character who's actually a human, but she's been raised by a vampire, and she enters these games, and obviously it's her against a load of these vampires, but she ends up meeting this vampire called Rain, and they kind of team up, they form this kind of like alliance, and romance does ensue. But you've got to think about it. It's like the Hunger Games. There can only be one winner, and it is the case of killing each other to survive. So you know it can't end well. You know that there can only be one winner. So it just makes it so intense. Like, you just want them both to be able to succeed. And it is just, I found it so good. I loved all the trials that they had to do and the games. I just found it so much fun while still being fully action-packed, and like my heart was racing because I was so nervous for these characters, but I just found it so good, and it's made me want to continue in the series. I've read fantasy books before where I've read the first book and it's not really intrigued me enough to continue, but this one, I've read the novella between the first and second book, which I also really enjoyed, and so now I've just got to read the second book, and I think there's definitely going to be more books in the series. I feel like Part of me thinks it's going to be quite a long series. I don't know whether I'm making that up or whether I've heard it, but that sort of kind of rings a bell, that it's going to be quite a long series. So I'm so excited to carry on with it, which is such a surprising thing for me to say. I'm usually a standalone person, like I don't typically read series, but this one I will 100% be reading. Next up, we have got The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. Now, this isn't one that I thought I would necessarily dislike, but the ratings of this are so mixed. It's got a really low average rating, and I think it's because people either really love it or really hate it. So it kind of skews the average rating to be a little bit on the low side. But this I found so good. It's so atmospheric, and it's just one that I keep thinking about. In this one, we are following this married couple, Eric and Andrew, and their daughter Wen, and they are staying in this cabin, and all of a sudden these people come knocking on their door telling them that the world's going to end and that they as a family need to make this one decision to prevent the world from ending, and it kind of goes on from there. We spend the majority of this time in the cabin. Okay, I had to have a little bit of a move. I can see this is where the lighting has gone terrible, but bear with me, I've only got this book and one other to talk about. So as I was saying before, this one, it's all set primarily in this cabin, and the fact that we can have such an atmosphere set within one place is just incredible, and it's so intense and you just don't know how it's going to go. I really loved it. Now, I can see why people don't like this one. This is one where you can see why it is so polarizing, because the ending is very ambiguous, and I know a lot of people don't like an ambiguous ending, and I can see why, but I just feel like it worked so well for this, and I thought it was such a good one. I just loved it so much, and I would love to read similar books to this one. I have read Leave the World Behind, which I would say is very similar to this. I really liked both of them. So any other recommendations that you have which have this similar vibe to them, I would really appreciate you sending some recommendations my way. Okay, let's quickly wrap this one up with the final book, which is The Haunting of Ashburn House by Darcy Coates. Now, this is one that has made me realise that I love cozy horror. I didn't really know that cozy horror existed, to be honest, before reading this book, because I was reading it and thinking, like, how can this have such a nice cozy vibe yet be about a haunted house? But it worked and I loved it. So in this one, we're following this woman. If you haven't noticed, by the way, I am really terrible with remembering character names, so I'll often just refer to the main character. In this one, we're following our main character, and she ends up inheriting Ashburn House. And it's come at a perfect time because she had nowhere to live, so her and her cat go along and move in to Ashburn House. Now, this is in a town where people are afraid of this house. People know that it's got this reputation and are scared of it. So she moves in, she meets all these new people who are very intrigued, and you kind of don't know whether they are befriending her for the right reasons, whether they're being genuine. So there's kind of that aspect of it as well, but then weird things start happening in this house, and I found it so good. It definitely does get very creepy towards the end. It did scare me a little bit, but I still really enjoyed it. I don't typically like a haunted house story, but this one just worked for me and I really loved it. So again, any cozy horror recommendations, send them my way, please. So that's it for this video. Those are the 7 most surprising books that I read in 2023. I've got my most disappointing books coming next, and I'm a bit nervous about that one because I feel like it's always a bit scary to talk negatively about books, and I feel like people can take it quite personally, but please don't. But anyway, yeah, so the next video you'll see is the most disappointing, and that is all from this video today. So I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, I would love it if you could like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!